While you may have never heard these sounds before, they were very important to many people in Auburn, and Auburn itself, as of only about 50 years ago. In fact, many Auburn citizens' livelihoods depended on the work done to make these sounds. Even the seal of Auburn has the product of these sounds on it, the sounds of shoemaking.
While the shoe industry had been present in Auburn for many years, there was one man who really made it take off: Eric Cushman. Cushman, known as the patriarch of the shoe industry in Auburn, arrived onto the shoe industry scene in 1863. He started out in a small shop in West Minot with less than 20 square feet, which people called the tea can. Soon, he had to move to a larger place, so he set up shop in Auburn, where he built a brick factory next to the railroad tracks on Court Street. The shoe industry had been strong in Auburn, but Cushman brought in a golden age. Cushman was a visionary shoemaker using the Mackay stitcher, a machine that did the work in a minute that took an hour to do by hand. This meant Cushman could rapidly expand his business, and soon many other shoe companies were following in his example. This progress increased the amount of footwear produced by huge margins. In 1865, shortly after Cushman arrived on the shoemaking scene, about 600,000 pairs of shoes were produced each year in Auburn. By 1871, that number was about 2,370,000 pairs. This dramatic increase was partly due to the invention of the Goodyear welt machine, which replaced the Mackay stitcher and was even faster than its predecessor. These shoes were produced through a relatively simple process. First, the leather would be tanned. Then, the tanned hide would be cut by a die cutter. These cut pieces would be stitched together into the relative shape of a shoe. Finally, these shoe pieces would be decoratively stitched and put through the lasting process of heat and steam, and then would be shipped off to be sold. So what would have happened if the Mackay stitcher or the Goodyear welt machine had never been invented? Well, most likely, Eric Cushman's company would not have been nearly as successful as it was. This would mean that the other shoe companies in Auburn would not have had Cushman as a figure to rally behind, so they would not have expanded as quickly and might have simply wasted away without an economic boom. On the other hand, the lack of machines could have left a hole that needed to be filled by people, so many more people could have been hired as workers. This could have helped the economy because instead of machines taking away jobs, the jobs would have stayed with the people. More people would have had more money to spend, and Auburn could have become a wealthier town. However, the shoe boom would not have lasted as long without machinery, so the benefits would have been short-lived. But what ifs aside, the shoe industry did develop, and how did this impact the workers in town that this happened in? Almost all of the impacts were positive. Workers' wages were increasing, so they had more money for personal spending or saving. If they decided to spend their money, then the money went back into the community. The shoe workers spent their money on things like food, clothes, and housing. When they spent this money, the money went to the workers and people who were selling these goods, so the economy prospered all over again. The exact number of shoe workers is unknown, but in 1873, about 1,000 people were employed by the shoe industry. Male shoe workers were paid an average of $12 per week, and female workers were paid an average of $8 per week. And so the shoe industry, and Auburn as well, grew. In 1860, near the beginning of the shoe industry in Auburn, the population of Auburn was about 4,000. In 1890, the population was about 12,000 and continued to steadily grow. Why did this happen? The success of the shoe industry in Auburn attracted attention, and not just from residents of the U.S. Many French-Canadian immigrants came by the thousands to Auburn, and most of them worked in the shoe industry. This greatly helped the shoe industry because some of these Canadians were used to manual labor, as many of them had worked on farms. These French Canadians shared their skills and expertise with the American workers that they worked next to. If they had not come to Auburn, not only would Auburn be a much smaller city, but the shoemaking industry would not have had the ideas and techniques — Canadians were very good at making simple, high-quality shoes — that the Canadian culture brought. But the shoe industry could not prosper forever. The Cushman Company, by far the largest shoe company in Auburn at the time, had a profit-sharing policy for wages. When profits were good, workers were happy. However, when profits dropped, the Cushman Company couldn't keep paying the bills. Eric Cushman, the patriarch of the shoe industry, closed his doors in 1903. 7 years later, separated from his calling, Cushman died. This transition greatly hurt the shoe industry, and shoe production went down. What would have happened if Cushman had kept his company open and sales had been good? It's hard to say exactly, but the shoe industry probably would have prospered even more than it ended up doing. Cushman would not have lived forever, so this boom wouldn't have lasted more than 10 or so years, but that would have been enough time for a different shoe company to rise up and become very successful. But even though the Cushman Company closed, another company did rise up. Well, not actually another company, just a different name. After 1910, when his father died, Charles L. Cushman got the Cushman Company running again. But now, because he had joined forces with another aspiring shoemaker, John J. Hollis, the Cushman Company came back as the Cushman-Hollis Company. However, disaster struck quickly again. The people of the Twin Cities were shocked when, on April 30th, 1914, Charles Cushman died. His health had been declining, and he had gone to Europe on a steamship to try to improve it. However, he died on the voyage. John Hollis continued the company without him, but it was a major blow to the shoe industry, as it was the end of the line that had basically created the shoe industry in Auburn. But the Cushman-Hollis Company kept making shoes. It soon made a name for itself with its signature white canvas shoes, similar to the shoes Eric Cushman had made. These shoes quickly became wildly popular, and soon another company, the Dingley Foss Company, made them as well, just to keep up with the demand. At the height of the white shoe run, these two companies alone made about 50,000 pairs of white canvas shoes per day. Between August 1st, 1922 and July 31st, 1923, over 10 million of these white canvas shoes were manufactured. These things led Auburn to be known as the white shoe capital of the world. This white shoe boom benefited the shoe industry for a few years, but by 1926 fewer white canvas shoes were being manufactured. The Cushman-Hollis Company and the Dingley Foss Shoe Company continued to be mainstays of the shoe industry in Auburn, but they no longer relied on the production of white canvas shoes. Instead, Auburn's shoe industry returned to the production of leather shoes and work boots. But normalcy did not last for long in the shoe industry. On October 29, 1929, the stock market crashed. This was the beginning of a huge transformation of the shoe industry, one whose repercussions would be, and will be, felt for decades, maybe even centuries to come. You see, as the stock market crashed, many people tried to withdraw all of their money very quickly from the banks. The banks didn't keep all of their money on hand, so they had to close their doors. All of a sudden, people who had had tens of thousands of dollars in their bank account had nothing. Nothing at all. And what do you do if you have nothing? You don't buy new shoes. You scrape together what you have to pay for a meal or two, and then you hope that your shoes don't get worn out too soon. To try to get people to buy shoes, shoe companies such as the Cushman-Hollis Company and the Dingley Foss Shoe Company cut their prices. But how do you cut prices while still making a profit? You cut wages as well. And so workers started making less money than they had ever made before, and they were barely able to support themselves. So, on March 26, 1937, the shoe workers of Lewiston and Auburn went on strike. It was one of the largest labor disputes in Maine history, and lasted from March to June. At its peak, it involved 4,000 to 5,000 workers. At one point, workers in Lewiston attempted to cross the bridge across the Androscoggin River to get to Auburn, but Maine Governor Lewis Barrows had to call in the National Guard to stop them. This event got a lot of attention, and soon the CIO, Congress of Industrial Organizations, got involved as well. Some labor leaders were imprisoned for months after a Maine Supreme Judicial Court judge issued an injunction seeking to end the strike. Although the strike ended after a few months, the shoe industry didn't recover for a long time. The Cushman-Hollis Company was hit particularly hard by the loss of profits, since it had to shut down its factory, and it soon had to close its doors. Business was hard through World War II, when many men had to go fight in the war. This hurt the shoe industry, and business declined. It was the beginning of the end. But the end was not quite there yet. After World War II, the shoe industry boomed again.
Every place else in the world had been bombed out. All of Europe, so much of Asia. So we were the manufacturing. So the American shoe industry thrived, everyone thrived in this country at that time.
However, during this boom, China began to make shoes. Soon, the US could no longer compete with the low prices of Chinese shoes, and business began to move offshore. Between 1957 and 1961, the largest shoe manufacturers, including the Dingley Foss Shoe Company, closed their doors. The shoe industry continued to decline.
Factory after factory after factory closed down.
But in 1972, the shoe industry's fate was really sealed. On August 21st, 1972, a wrecking ball slammed into the old Cushman-Hollis building. It had been the final landmark of a great time. time where Auburn was the white shoe capital of the world, a time when the sound of shoemaking could be heard almost everywhere. Soon after that fateful day, most of the rest of the shoe companies closed their doors. Today, only one shoe company is still in Auburn, Globe Footwear LLC. It is in a relatively small building on Wright's Landing Road, the only small remnant of an industry that once defined the city.
And so the shoe industry is almost gone from Auburn. Hit by many unlucky twists along the road, it simply couldn't keep going. The shoe boom has gone away. But we do know that the shoe industry is a huge part of our history, and that will never leave us.